You're listening to Civic Media. Stay up to date on the latest news and information for your local community and Wisconsin by signing up for our free email newsletter. Visit civicmedia.us/email to get started.
And good evening and welcome to another edition of the Big High School Sports Show, brought to you by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO, online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Along with former Wausau West head football coach Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. We will recap week number 7 of the football regular season. We'll also look ahead to week number 8, plus we have a pair of special guests. Coming up at 6:25 this evening, it's our head coach guest for this week from Stevens Point Area Senior High as they get set for their big conference showdown at DC Everest on Friday. We'll talk to their head man, Ryan Eigenberger. And then at 7:06 tonight, it's our student-athlete guest as we continue to bring in the linemen this season. More linemen this year than we've had before. And from Newman Catholic, offensive and defensive lineman, senior Carson Calo. So that's coming up here on the program. Jason Foster with us. And I tell you, we are down the stretch, and we were just trying to figure out some of these teams. And right now, and again, when you have automatic, get 4 wins, but there's going to be a lot of 3-win teams. So again, there's still a lot that we aren't going to know when all is said and done coming up in about 9 days.
Yeah, and the other interesting part to that is many of those teams will likely get in, but that kind of muddies the waters a little bit for how those regions set up then, who gets in, and then which teams from the East and which teams from the West end up in which section, and that really throws off seeding. You'll have somewhere some years a 7-2 team doesn't get a home game, and there might be other years where a 6-3 team gets a home game. Yep. So those are all to be determined.
Well, let's talk about what happened last week as we, again, get closer and closer to determining conference champions and the playoff berths as well. Wisconsin Valley, Big Rivers Conference East last week. The crossover saw DC Everest head to Chippewa Falls, and high-scoring affair. Chippewa Falls defeated the Evergreens 41-36. So Chi-High 5-2 overall. They are 3-2 in the Big Rivers Conference. Everest is 5-2, 4-1 when it comes to playoff qualification. Still 4-0 technically in the WVC. It was a game where Chippewa Falls came out and had some big plays. They led 27-7 after 1, 35-15 at halftime before DC Everest rallied. Chippewa Falls had touchdown plays of 75 yards and 56 yards on the ground, 63 yards on a fumble return, 92 yards on a kickoff return, all in the first quarter. DC Everest, some games this year, they haven't asked Logan George to throw it a lot. They asked Logan George to throw it a lot last week. He was 24 of 37, 389 yards, a touchdown, and 3 interceptions. Blake Bankston cracked the 1,000-yard mark for the season, had another 100-yard rushing game, 22 carries, 125 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Xavier Edwards had a monster night for DCE. 8 catches for 210 yards. Jackson LeMay of Chippewa Falls, 19 rushes for 175 yards and a touchdown. When you look at that game, obviously Chippewa Falls came out early and had some big plays. DC Everest chipped away. They had a Hail Mary at the end to try and win the football game. I imagine Everest is kicking themselves a little bit when you give up that many big plays, especially those returns, and then lose by less than a touchdown. It has to be frustrating for DC Everest to lose that game.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you prepare for games like this, a less common opponent, although they've played Chippewa Falls the last couple of years early in the season, non-conference.
And frankly, real fast, those were normally low-scoring games.
Yeah, they really were. I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing. When you look at the teams who kind of sit near the top of the WVC BRC East, they seem to be a little more defensive in nature. But when these teams cross over, or you look at the teams on the West, they seem to be much higher scoring affairs. I don't know if that speaks more to the power of the offense or the maybe a little less on the defensive end. But yeah, this is one that DC Everest, you got to clean up one mistake or two, and you got yourselves a win. And I think this also, we talked early in the season about how do the two conferences compare, the East and the West?
Right.
And I think this is one of those games that you probably then tilt things to the West a little bit. Obviously not a completely clean game and whatever, but Chippewa Falls, who's 3-2 in that conference, has now beat Everest and SPASH, who sit on top of the East. So I think you probably at this point of the year give the nod to the West as being the stronger of the two.
And also, speaking of the playoffs, despite the 2 losses already for Chippewa Falls, and even maybe if they lose a third game, they have a pretty good resume to get a home game, even with multiple losses, don't they?
Yeah, they've kind of put. I don't know who they have left on their schedule, but their tough ones are probably a little bit behind them, and I think you're right. I think that matches up. I think those are things that it's my understanding that was one of the tweaks they've made to the computer for this season when it comes to seeding, is that head-to-head does have a little more weight than it has in the past, because that's been one of the major complaints thus far.
Right.
So if that is the case, that certainly bodes well for Chippewa Falls if they all end up in the same, and they all are D1 schools when you look at SPASH, Everest, Chippewa, Hudson.
And actually, they do have 2 tough games coming up. They play at Hudson this week, and then they host Menominee next week.
So easy ones for them.
So they may be a 6-3 team or even a 5-4 team.
Yeah.
And if that occurs, then it's going to be very interesting to see a Wisconsin Valley Conference team that finishes maybe 7-2 or 6-3.
Lost, yeah.
And at least one of them will be 6-3 at best, because Everest plays Stevens Point. So again, I think it's going to be a rather interesting Saturday morning coming up in a week and a half.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, the other thing to take away from this game is that Everest's looks like offensively, other than the mistakes, the interceptions, looks like they kind of put their playmakers had big games, right? Logan George had a ton of completion, or a ton of yards, ton of completions. The 3 interceptions, obviously they look to clean up, but Bankston over 1,000 yards rushing. Xavier Edwards, 8 catches, 200 yards. Like, those are the things they're going to need to be doing to beat SPASH and then to make a playoff run.
Stevens Point, meantime, set things up for their matchup at Everest this week, defeating Eau Claire North 35-14. It was actually a 1-score game going to the 4th quarter before Stevens Point scored a pair of times in the 4th to pull away. Johnny Matthews, it looks like he's getting more explosive, because early in the season was not putting up huge numbers, and it's something we'll talk about obviously with Coach Eigenberger coming up in a little bit, but I thought he impressed me more 2 weeks ago when I saw him in person for the first time than I thought I might, and then last week to get 222 yards, a touchdown on 27 rushes. Grant Chaudenat again balances out between the rushing and the passing. 12 carries, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 of 10 passing, 119 yards and 2 scores. But again, it wasn't easy. It does not appear to be easy for Stevens Point this year, with maybe the notable exception of the game 2 weeks ago against West, but they're finding ways to still win football games.
Yeah, I would say when I look at these stats numbers, same thing as you said. Matthews is obviously coming around. This has got to be his biggest game of the year. Looks like more touches than he's had previously, and a really efficient game for Grant Chaudenat. When you look at 12 rushes, 100 yards, 7 for 10, 120 yards, 4 total touchdowns. So really good, efficient game for him. And I think Eau Claire North is kind of doing Eau Claire North things. I think they're the team that you end this season wherever they end up, probably likely not in the playoffs, but possibly. And the season ends and you think, okay, they're probably the team ready to take the next step as you look forward to next year, because they've been in these games. They do things offensively. They just can't finish. So those are things you fix in the offseason.
Marshfield has dug themselves out of their hole. It looks like they're heading to the playoffs with a big win at Wausau West last week. Marshfield edged the Warriors 14-8. So Marshfield, after their slow start, now 3-4 overall. 3-2 when it comes to playoff qualification, and actually 3-1 in the conference, which is pretty hard to believe after all the difficulties they had early. And basically the other direction for Wausau West. The last 2 weeks have been rough ones for the Warriors, especially offensively. Have not been able to get the offense going. They're now 3-4 overall, 2-3 in the conference, and they have some important work to do the next 2 weeks. Chase Robinson, again, not much passing, 6 of 10, 57 yards, but 3 third-down conversions on the final drive of the game. He made the big plays when they needed to run off the clock. Marshfield only had 111 yards rushing. Warrior defense did a good job, 3.1 yards per carry. Jack Kostrowski, 11 of 20, 85 yards, a touchdown and 2 picks for West. And the Warriors, I think probably the most surprising aspect was they could not run the ball. They only had 95 yards rushing, 3.5 yards per carry. It was a game where the defenses definitely carried the action, and Marshfield very impressive. And I think I was talking to somebody in the box that they had moved a couple of players around a little bit to focus on the defense, and whatever they did was very, very effective.
Yeah, I think probably talking a little bit about Cooper DePoy playing more linebacker. And
that's all about Marshfield, actually.
Oh, Marshfield. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Somebody I was talking to in the booth that they had moved a couple of guys to the defensive side of the football away from the offense to try and secure that a little bit. And again, I was a little surprised about how well they played defensively last week.
Yeah, I was talking to Coach Gadel before the game. Their two best defenders on the year, their best wrestler, number 18, his name's escaping me, but their two best defenders are out for the year, sitting on the sideline with their jerseys on. So, and have been out for a minute. They didn't just lose them. So I think those are all things they've been trying to do. Kind of like we talked earlier in the year. I think West's defense was lagging a little bit early on, and their offense was maybe carrying a little bit. And the opposite was true Friday night, or needed to. The defense played better, offense struggled, but I think that was SPASH too, or Marshfield. They were struggling to score points early in the year. They didn't light anything up on Friday night, but more recently, consistently, they have been scoring more points. So yeah, they shored up their defense, and West just couldn't get out of its own way. Part of their issues with not being able to run the ball is they put themselves in way too many positions where they couldn't run the ball. Like a lot of penalties, a lot of behind the sticks, a lot of negative yardage plays on first and second down, and just forced themselves into passing situations, and then kind of had the struggles throwing the ball and a couple picks, which led to Marshfield's 2 scores. And all that being said, West kind of had the late rally, scored, blocked a punt. Maybe a little homer here, but a little questionable call on a non-pass interference in the end zone. So I mean, they still had to score, and take nothing away from Marshfield. They won that football game. But yeah, I mean, all said and done, these teams are probably sitting in a pretty similar place right now, I would say.
And it was a game that somebody was going to get their first win last week, and Eau Claire Memorial did so. They went to Wisconsin Rapids, defeated the Lincoln Red Raiders 30-22. Aaron Gunlock was 20 of 33, 210 yards and a touchdown for ECM. ECM's been a team that had been able to move the football quite a bit this year, and that performance, and obviously Rapids has struggled offensively, but still for Eau Claire Memorial to give up just 22 points, that gives them a chance to win because they have been putting up points.
Yeah, that's actually an offensive explosion for Wisconsin Rapids, scoring 22 points. But yeah, I mean, Eau Claire Memorial's obviously not program-wise as far down the road as Eau Claire North is, but all year long, right? Even in their blowouts, they've been scoring 20 plus, 30 points a game because they're able to, I think they get big plays, they chuck the ball a lot, and that's probably going to be a challenge this coming week for the Warriors.
Great Northern Conference, Wausau East in a thriller edges Merrill 16-14 on Saturday. Both teams 4-3 overall. East is now 3-2 in conference, Merrill 2-3. Ian Stahl, 15 rushes, 117 yards. Davis Winter, 12 of 25, 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Elmer Hurd had a big day defensively for East, 17 tackles, 3.5 sacks. E.J. Wykes was the quarterback. He is not normally the quarterback, an emergency quarterback. I went to the game. I thought he did an outstanding job, really helping Merrill keep the football, be able to move it, gave them the lead on a touchdown run with about 4 minutes to go in the game. I thought Merrill played really a gutsy game. They made plays when they had to, but then East was able to make plays, and a 29-yard field goal by Gio Gomez with 30 seconds to go gave them the W. And it was really a very exciting game and a huge win because both teams, they needed that one to get to 3 wins in the conference.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Gio Gomez also plays soccer for him. I was at the East-West soccer game a couple weeks ago. I think he might be their best soccer player.
And he missed an extra point earlier, so he actually
needed that one.
He needed that one.
Well, good redemption for that. But yeah, we've talked kind of been one of our themes this year is to talk about injuries, and when you have injuries, it's not just replacing that position, because in a program like Merrill or many schools in the GNC, when it comes to numbers, the old saying, right? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? Because you're taking somebody out of their other position, and you're asking a lot of that individual, and other guys then having to slide and rotate, and guys, we've talked a lot with Newman, guys getting into the game who probably weren't even in the game, or maybe even on the team the week before, whatever the case may be. So yeah, gutsy performance for Merrill, good win for East, right? I mean, they probably character builder to come down on that last drive and win the game in the way they did. Probably went into that game thinking they weren't going to have as much of a challenge as Merrill put forth. So good for both, and kind of another, who's who in the GNC type game.
Yep, that puts East in third place. That establishes them as the number 3 team right now. Number 2 is still Mosinee, and they earned a big win against Rhinelander, 26-6. Mosinee now 5-2 overall, 4-1 in the conference. Rhinelander 3-4, 1-4 in the conference. Treve Stoffel, 14 of 22, 273 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Also had 10 rushes, 56 yards. Brady Locken, his top target, 6 catches, 144 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Mosinee, they stubbed their toe a couple of weeks back against Wausau East, but now 2 wins in a row, keeping themselves with that opportunity next week, if they take care of business, to still have a chance to get a share of the conference championship.
Yeah, and that matchup or that connection between Treve Stoffel and Brady Locken seems to each week kind of more catches, more yards, more touchdowns. So that's probably what they're going to have to do to compete against Medford, is be able to throw the ball and open things up and hope for some big plays, because possession is probably not. And hopefully Mosinee keeps getting healthier each week.
And Medford, again, continues to dominate. They defeated Tomahawk 38-7. Medford 6-1 overall, 5-0 in the conference. Tomahawk now 2-5 overall, 1-4 in the conference. Paxton Rothmeyer, back-to-back huge games. He's rushed for more than 500 yards combined the last 2 weeks. He had nearly 300 yards against East, and now against Tomahawk, 23 rushes, 220 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then to add a little icing on his cake, added a 50-yard fumble return for a 4th touchdown as well. He basically was the offense. He had 220 on the ground. They had 293 yards of total offense. Braden Larson had 20 rushes, 97 yards, and a score for Tomahawk, who was held to just under 200 yards of total offense by the Medford defense.
Yeah, and at what point does Medford start to throw the ball?
You've been saying
yes,
that.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you're going to, because I've been in their shoes before. I've been where you can dominate running the football, but eventually they're going to have to be able to throw the ball if they want to make a deep, probably not to win the conference, but if you want to win some games in the playoffs. So I think that's probably the next thing. And you would hope that in some of these games where they feel good about how controlling the game, that would be a good opportunity to work on that.
And Antigo, for the first time this year, lost a close one. Actually, they dug themselves a bit of a hole. They were down by 17 points going into the 4th quarter. They scored a couple of touchdowns, but in the end couldn't get over the hump, as Lakeland earned a big win for their playoff hopes, edging Antigo 36-33. So Lakeland 3-4 overall, 2-3 in the conference. Antigo's 4-3 overall, but the numbers that really matter as we get to this point of the year is what's your conference record, and they're 2-3 in the GNC. And Evan Zock was the guy who put the points up for Lakeland. He had all 5 of their touchdowns. He had 17 rushes, 110 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Added 3 catches for 133. And when he caught a pass, it was a touchdown. 3 catches, 3 touchdowns for Lakeland. And as we get to the final weeks of the regular season in the GNC, it's a little bit of surprises as you get past Medford and Mosinee. Antigo, I still think, is a bit of a surprise. Lakeland is right there as they tend to be at this point. Rhinelander, I think, is a little bit further down than we thought they might be so far this season, but still a lot to play for all these teams.
Yeah, I think if I'm playing Lakeland in the next couple of weeks, I know what I'm game planning for, obviously with Evan Zock. But interesting, like this is another one where I think Lakeland not having their quarterback, who I believe is a really nice athlete, from what I understand for the rest of the year, they're probably trying to figure things out too. But again, Antigo, 33 points against, the enrollments of these two schools. And I mean, I think Antigo, obviously, aside from maybe Medford and even Mosinee, but who the heck knows? I mean, scoring 33 points against Lakeland, I've been impressed with them, and nothing they do from the remainder of the time would surprise me.
And remember the first show of the season, we were talking about Antigo, and you were mentioning during their kickoff preview on Channel 12, they were talking more about what happened in the past, back in Gordy Schofield's days. This team, I think, has probably exceeded expectations more than maybe anybody else in the GNC so far this year.
Yeah, and their wins are tough and gritty, right? I mean, they come down to the final, they battle. Like you said in the beginning, this is the first close one they haven't won. And shoot, They were right there at the end.
We'll talk about the CWC divisions and also 8-player a little bit later on. But coming up next, we'll have our first guest for tonight. Again, coming up in the second hour, we'll have our student-athlete guest, Newman Catholic football senior Carson Calo. But coming up next, we'll talk to the head football coach of Stevens Point Area Senior High. Again, tied with DC Everest atop the Wisconsin Valley Conference / Big Rivers Conference East, going into their showdown on Friday night at Steam. We'll talk to Stevens Point head coach Ryan Eigenberger coming up next. Again, it is the Big High School Sports Show presented by K5 Construction. K5 Construction, a family-owned and operated custom builder in central Wisconsin that stands out from the rest for its commitment to quality and excellence. From design and planning to the final construction, K5 Construction delivers superior results on every project. Check them out online, buildwithk5.com. Coach Eigenberger coming up next here on the Big High School Sports Show presented by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO. It's a must-win game for the Wausau West High School football team on Friday night. The Warriors travel to Eau Claire to take on Memorial with their playoff hopes on the line. Hear all the exciting action live on 98.9 WXCO, online at BowFallsRadio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Coverage begins with the pregame show at 6:35 and the opening kickoff at 7 p.m. Wausau West Sports on 98.9 WXCO is brought to you by the Cloverbell Credit Union, Red Robin Restaurants, Sun Printing, the Wausau West Athletic Department, North Star Restoration, K5 Construction, and Coast to Coast Marketing. It's Wausau West at Eau Claire Memorial in high school football. Friday night, starting with the pregame show at 6:35, opening kickoff at 7 on your home for Wausau West Sports, 98.9 WXCO, BowFallsRadio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And welcome back. It is the Big High School Sports Show presented by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO, online at BowFallsRadio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And again, don't forget, once we're done with the show, if you miss any part of it, if you miss previous shows, just go to BowFallsRadio.com, click on sports, and you can listen to a podcast. And you can also subscribe on either Apple Podcast or Spotify as well. But now time for our coach guest for this week from Stevens Point Area Senior High School. Their head man, third year with the Panthers, looking for a second straight conference championship, Ryan Eigenberger. And Coach, first of all, thank you again for coming back on the program.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely as well. And obviously, as we get to this part of the year, very, very exciting time of the year, going into some big games, including one of the big games in our area this week that you're involved in. But before we talk about this week against DC Everest, let's take a step back. Obviously, last season was a great success for your team, able to win the conference championship, do a lot of great things, but lost some pretty significant playmakers from your squad. Going into this season, what was the thought about this group of Stevens Point Panthers? What were the expectations? And has the season gone the way that you thought it might when we first got underway in the offseason last year?
Yeah, I think coming into the year, we evaluated where our guys were at and what we had returning and look at the younger JV team as well. And we thought we still had a lot of really good playmakers that were coming up that were unproven for sure, but some dynamic athletes, and obviously having Grant Shotna back for his third year and three returning all-conference offensive linemen. We wanted to lean into that a little bit on the offensive side, and defensively, we had a lot of the spine of our defense back and our two stud corners. So we wanted to, stick with what we were doing defensively and just let our guys fly around, kind of play free, make big plays. And I think they've done that so far this year. We've on both sides of the ball. I mean, we started off with a tough loss at Chippewa Falls. I think it's a great program, and we had some opportunities that we just didn't take care of, and then we figured it out. And then our only other loss is a tough game against Hudson, and a great environment up there, and again another great program, and came down to the wire, and real proud of the way our guys battled. And so this year, we had those two losses, but our guys have stuck to the goals, and we want to repeat as conference champions. And We got 2 games left, but Friday is a big step towards that with Everest right now being the other undefeated team in conference.
Yeah, Coach. So first off, congratulations on a great start to the year. As we've talked on the show each week and recapped your games, and I had the opportunity to watch you guys live against Wausau West a couple weeks ago too, it looks like the offense has kind of evolved a little bit as the season went on. Last year you guys were solid all the way around, but obviously had the big playmakers and stuff like that. And it's been interesting to watch Grant's numbers as the years has gone on, like number of rushing attempts, number of passing. And I know each defense brings a little different challenge, but can you talk a little about how it has evolved over the season offensively? In particular, looking at Johnny Matthews' rushing yards this last week, looks like he had a little bigger role than he's had up to this point.
Yeah, and some of that's dictated on, Kyle Madalena and Johnny Matthews was where we wanted to be at, running the ball in the backfield, and we started having to use, due to some injuries, use Kyle on defense, and he's really stepped up for us there. So we're really happy with him being a real selfless player. And, we go in still hoping to get him a few touches, but we rode the hot hand last week with Johnny Matthews. And he's just a dynamic player. So we want to try to get him the ball as often as possible. We wanted to, with his first year being up on varsity, we wanted to monitor kind of how he was used early and then kind of let him go as the season went on. And that's really where we've been at with him. And I think we're in a good spot with that. And same thing with Grant. Grant just put in a lot of hard work in the off season. He's put on a lot of weight where I was more comfortable being able to run him a little bit more, and he can take some hits and deliver some blows too. He's a really hard runner. So he added that to his game, and now he's throwing the ball really well again too. So we added that dynamic back, and there's some explosiveness in there.
Talking about your offense, seeing it in person 2 weeks ago when you did play Wausau West, and a very impressive performance for your team. It was a great environment, homecoming, big crowd, and you were able to come out there and perform exceptionally well. Could you talk about the keys to executing that offense? Because you use those short passes, and they turn into pretty good chunk plays because you execute so well. What is the key in terms of that short pass attack that you're able to get good yardage on it? What as a coach, maybe to explain for folks watching it, what are the keys to the success when you're running that offense very well, like you did 2 weeks ago in that game against West?
Well, I'll start with, every week. This is not the schematic answer yet. I can talk about what we look for, but we talk about being physical every week. And we include our perimeter guys in that. So we work on blocking, and everybody works on that. And our receivers really buy into that as well. So, like when we sprung a few of those against West, it was because of the physicality that we played with up front on the line and out on the perimeter. Our guys really buy into that. Each week, that's number one goal for us. And we talk about how we can play physical and what we mean by that. So we define that for our players, and they really buy into it. That was our goal last year. We came in, we just thought we were just a little too soft 2 years ago, and we said, you know what, number one every week is going to be let's play physical on both sides of the ball. And our guys buy into that. When we throw some of the quick stuff, we give Grant a little bit of opportunity too to kind of just count the numbers, read the defense. We can do a couple different types of quick screens out there, and depending on the way the defense is aligned. So, if we have a safety over number 2 and there's no outside linebacker or nickel defender out there, and the safety is 10 yards off, we're gonna try to throw the ball out there and let our guys make a play. And then same thing, we can do that if a corner is playing really far off as well. We can make a play out there. We call them gift routes. We let our guys kind of adjust to the gift route, whatever they're giving us, and we try to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and you guys do an outstanding job with that. One of the things I was wondering, I know this is only your third year in the conference, so you haven't been in the Wisconsin Valley Conference for that long, but being in the new conference this year, you guys had two tough your two losses are against two really tough teams from the other side, two of the big Division I teams from the other side. What has been your take on the new conference in year one and some of the matchups? Do you think it's been a good change, a good fit, or do you have concerns? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't really. It's something that I can't control, so I don't think about it too much. I like I say a lot, I repeat what Mr. Hauser told me one time. We're SPASH. It doesn't matter. We're always going to play the toughest, and everyone is always going to give us their best. So, we're never going to shy away from anybody. Our non-conference games were always real tough anyway, whether we were playing Kimberly or McGuanago or Hudson, the last 2 years anyway. So, we're always ready for that. I like those types of games. It's a great atmosphere. It gets your players ready. It lets you see kind of where you're at early on in the year, and it lets you kind of see maybe where you could grow a little bit and improve, and what you got working really well. So I like being with a tough conference like that. I think they're a really, really, really good conference over there with the Big Rivers. It's crazy to think. I think Chippewa Falls and Hudson are maybe going to be battling to honestly make the playoffs, or
right.
At least I think only one of them is going to be a 3-win team. So hopefully they get in because they're two great programs. But yeah, it's fun playing those teams, I think.
Again, we're talking to Stevens Point area senior high school head football coach Ryan Eigenberger here on the Big High School Sports Show presented by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO. Let's talk a little bit more about the defense, because obviously we always tend to look at those numbers on the offensive side, but the numbers you've put up defensively have been very good this season. Obviously, you said it, the first game of the year was maybe that aberration, 36 points allowed against Stevens Point, but since then, really a lot of great numbers on the defensive side of the football. You mentioned the fact about the physicality. What else has been key, and maybe some of the guys that are doing the work for you on the defensive side of the football?
I think what's key for us is, we think that the team that, again, plays more physical and then blocks and tackles better on Friday night is typically the team that wins. So we really buy into working on tackling and doing some pretty basic fundamental drills a few times a week, and continuing to do that throughout the year to work on that tackling aspect. So I think that's a big thing for us. And it's something that we always try to improve. Then we have some ways to look at certain numbers like yards after contact and how much we're giving up. So we look at those numbers and try to make sure that we're limiting those. I think defensively, Connor Scarston is the inside linebacker, and Nick Roska, both our inside guys, have been doing a really great job of bottling things up the middle. And Calvin Roth is our safety, who makes a lot of tackles for us each and every week. And he's flying around. I think our two corners, Johnny Ananiedis and Jackson Speeds, are two all-conference players from last year that, they're pretty tough to throw it against. So, we're always real confident whenever that ball goes in the air that, they're going to make a play or at least try to knock it down and limit explosive plays. Then up front, too, I think we have Brett Standifer and Owen Vandenelzen are two returners for us that play on the line that put a lot of pressure on us. They suck up some blockers. They do their jobs every single play, and they do all the dirty work. And, on the D-line, that's where it's at. They do all the dirty work, and some of the other guys get all the tackles, but they do a great job of that. So I think it's all around great team effort. They pick each other up. One guy misses something, the other guy's going to be right there to make a tackle, make a play, knock a ball down. So I think that's really that team aspect that they all buy into.
Coach, last time I was hired as a head coach was at Wausau West, and the athletic director who hired me, Dan Hine, one of the things he said to me in the interview, which I'll always remember and I thought was a really good point, was that when you come into a new program, it's not really everything's not officially yours and has your stamp on it until year 5. So being in year 3, so no matter how good or how bad things go in those first few years, you're still dealing with some kids who went through a different youth program and different. So being in year 3, how do you feel about where you guys are at and where you guys are headed? Knowing you're getting close to year 5, you're over halfway through year 3. How do you feel about where the program's at, and what else do you think you need to work on?
We feel great at where the program's at. We've connected more. Once we got here, we combined our ninth grades. We did that where instead of having Ben Franklin and PJ Jacobs have two separate ninth grade teams, they're one ninth grade team. We bring them over to SPASH. We call them SPASH. And we get our 7th to 8th graders involved in the summer programs. And, we do a lot of things where we're trying to build it all up. And I think some of that comes from, where I came from, it was a smaller school program. So I don't know. I just was used to treating the program as almost a 4 through 12 type of program, grade 4 through grade 12. So I brought that mentality here. I try to be involved in the youth area football. We have our guys showing up on Saturdays at youth area football games. So I'm really happy with where the program's at. I'm really happy with where the players really buy into that and giving back to it. We have our Ben PJ's 8th grade game on tomorrow night, and we talked about, like seniors, we want you there and to give back to the young kids, and, what type of legacy do you want to leave? And we're really happy with that. I think we can continue to improve that, and especially me, continue to improve having a little bit more of that cohesiveness from those younger grades on up as far as it's schematically. And like I talked about our tackling before, I think we have to make sure our guys are hearing the same type of language, the same type of verbiage used when we're talking about some of those fundamental skills. So we're still working on improving that, but I think we've made a lot of great strides here.
One other thing, kind of piggybacking on that, is you said it. You've seen some of the best teams from the western part of the state the last couple of years since being at Stevens Point. You've seen some of the best teams over on the eastern part of the state since being at Stevens Point. And I know that in talking to a lot of people around high school football here in central Wisconsin, it's about trying to build things up generally here in central Wisconsin, especially specifically within each of these schools, to be able to compete and win some of these playoff games and to make deeper runs in the postseason. Do you feel as though that your program is getting closer in terms of that competition to take those steps to make deeper runs in the postseason playoffs, to be able to compete with some of these powerhouse programs that you've been able to see and compete with?
Yeah, I think we are, and it's a great question, a great point. I think when you look at a lot of the teams around here, a lot of the schools around here, I think it just starts in the weight room, and you're seeing more of the schools around here, including us, kind of buy into that more. But it's not just one sport, buy into it as like an athletic department. I know a lot of the other conference schools are doing that as well, and we're trying to continue to build up on that. I think that's just what you see in some of those consistent programs is just they have the great strength and conditioning part of even that their school day, and they have a great strength and conditioning program that goes down to the younger grades. And really, once you get to the playoffs, I mean, that's kind of what it's a test of is, who's still in the best shape, who's still healthy, who's still able to play at their peak level of performance, once you get to that week 10, week 11, week 12 part of the season. So I think that's a major, major part of it. And I see a lot of the teams around here really buying into that.
So getting back to this season and where things are at, you guys and DC Everest have kind of separated yourselves from the rest of the conference. What are you looking for this week in the matchup against DC Everest?
Well, Everest is a great program. Obviously a very storied program, and they're real proud. We know that they'll be up there, clanging some cowbells and getting excited on the sidelines, like they always do up in the stands. And they're well coached. They're real explosive. So, I think we're looking to do what we do. We're looking to play physical. We're looking to, give our guys the confidence to make plays. We talk about how we can draw things up on a whiteboard all the time, but that's not the way it's ever going to be on the game field. So you have to be confident in what you're doing, and as long as everyone on the field's on the same page, as long as somebody who makes a mistake makes an aggressive mistake, good things happen. So we know that on Friday in a game again, with two really good teams, nothing's going to be perfect. You have to be able to roll with the punches. There'll be some big gains. There'll be some big runs back and forth, and you have to be able to respond to those. And sometimes that's what it comes down to, is a team that can win some of those moments where the response is most important. After a big play, can your defense really step up and maybe stop the next play or stop the drive or stop the bleeding at that point, or after you turn the ball over or after you get a turnover, can you stay level-headed and really continue on with what your game plan was. So I think that's really what Friday comes down to is the team that's the best in those moments.
It certainly should be a lot of energy at Steam Stadium. It should be a fantastic matchup between, as you said, two programs with great tradition and currently doing exceptionally well as well. Coach, I know it's a very busy week, a big game coming up on Friday, but we do appreciate you spending a few minutes with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely. Ryan Eigenberger, head football coach at Stevens Point Area Senior High. We're going to take a timeout, continue to recap last week's action coming up next. And again, don't forget our student athlete guest coming up at 7:06, Newman Catholic senior Carson Calo. It is the Big High School Sports Show presented by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO. On Friday night, the Marathon High School football team needs a win to keep their playoff hopes alive. The Red Raiders travel to Wittenberg-Burnhamwood to take on the Chargers. Hear the game live on the Sports 2 stream of BullFallsRadio.com and the Civic Media app, starting with the pregame show at 6:40 and kickoff at 7 p.m. The game can also be heard on tape delay following the Wausau West game on 98.9 WXCO. Marathon football on WXCO is brought to you by Marathon Park City, Four Seasons Screen Printing, Brickner's of Little Chicago, County Materials, the People's State Bank, Marathon Cheese, the Dirks Group, Marathon Family Dentistry, the Marathon Athletic Club, Fisher Transportation, Morgan Sand and Gravel, Rip Balls Fabrication, and BS Taxidermy. It's Marathon at Wittenberg-Burnhamwood Friday night, starting with the pregame show at 6:40 on the Sports 2 stream of BullFallsRadio.com and the Civic Media app, and after Wausau West football on tape delay Friday night on 98.9 WXCO. And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show brought to you by K5 Construction. K5 Construction, a family-owned and operated custom builder in central Wisconsin that stands out from the rest for its commitment to quality and excellence. From design and planning to the final construction, K5 Construction delivers superior results on every project. Thanks to K5 Construction for their support and presentation of the Big High School Sports Show here on 98.9 WXCO. Found it interesting, that question you gave to Coach Eigenberger about 5 years. I think that is a wonderful perspective, because I do think a lot of times people expect turnover to happen so very quickly, and it does take time to actually implement a system that you as a head coach, as a leader of a program, believes in.
Yeah, it's actually a really good perspective. I thought about it a lot as during my tenure there at Wausau West, and I've actually thought about it too since getting out of it, is looking at whatever your position is, if you're new, like that leadership position, and developing it, and there's this is one of those things I love about the show, and love for people and parents or whoever's listening out there. There's a lot that goes into it. It isn't starting on August 4th or 5th and ending at the whatever in October, and you show up and then you move on to the next sport. For the head football coach, you spend pretty much right now 12 months out of the year doing it, and it isn't just high school football at this point. It is what is happening with your middle school, what is your youth and feeder programs, and are you working with those coaches? And then he hit it on the head too. Not only his program, but here, if you want to compete, it happens in the weight room. Yes. And it's not as simple as just saying kids need to get in there, because we want kids who play multiple sports. So you need to be on the same page with the coaches of those other sports. And then you need to respect the time of the kids and their families and make sure they're getting that. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think Coach is doing a great job and definitely taking that program in the right direction.
Let's talk about the CWC Large. Stratford continues to dominate. They rolled past Marathon 49-0 last Friday. Stratford still perfect, 7-0, 5-0. Marathon, again, just suffering through a lot of injuries and being shorthanded. 2-5. They've lost 4 in a row now, 1-4 in the conference. Reed Miller, 13 rushes, 130 yards and a touchdown. Jack Tubbs, it actually went down. The previous 2 weeks he had like 85% completion, only 65% last week only. 13 of 20, 151 yards and a score. Jet Shaner had 7 catches, 79 yards and a touchdown for Stratford. Logan Whitburler, 4 catches, 59 yards for Marathon. Stratford right now just clicking, and Marathon, unfortunately, just you don't. In a coach told me in high school football, it's not like the pros where they say next man up. It doesn't work that way in high school football. When you're going to third stringers, high school football teams aren't meant to be performing with third string quarterbacks and to be able to be effective. It's a learning experience for that third stringer. They hadn't had the reps. So again, it just takes time. It's just a difficult situation for the Raiders.
And the smaller the enrollment, the more that's magnified. And I think that's kind of what Marathon's. Other interesting thing that when I look at this game and don't have all the stats in front of me, but the fact that Jack Tubbs threw the ball 20 times, and what I would imagine he didn't play 4 quarters in a 49-0 game. So I'm wondering, is Stratford working on making sure they're able to throw the ball as they move forward, and knowing that they're making a playoff run in a higher division where they're probably going to see more passes and require more passing?
I think he did actually play into the fourth quarter when I was looking at the recap of that game, because they did score a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and he did throw a touchdown pass in the fourth. So
there we go.
So they kept him in there quite a while. But at the same time, at this point of the season, I mean, coaches, they don't want to pull their quarterback or players after a half.
Right.
You got to be ready to play 4 quarters, don't you?
Yep.
I mean,
absolutely.
you don't want to run up the score, but at the same time, you want to be prepared for a couple of weeks from now when you're playing for it all.
It's that old question, right? The whole balance of you staying healthy and getting rest, or not playing and getting rusty.
Exactly. So again, Stratford with the W. Also, it was Amherst, undefeated, 7-0, 5-0, but it was a lot more difficult for Amherst. Perhaps the play of the week in high school football in Wisconsin, not just central Wisconsin, as they pulled out on the last play of the game, a 25-21 win over Hard Luck Wyowega Fremont, who's now 3-4, 2-3 in the conference. Michael Gladowski was 13 of 15, 176 yards, a touchdown, 15 rushes, 52 yards, and a score. Sam Stukzinski at 26 rushes for 113 yards and a touchdown. But Amherst was down 21-19 with 3 seconds left, and they were set to try a 38-yard field goal. Gladowski could not cleanly grab the snap, so he rolled to the right sideline, almost out of bounds, threw up a prayer that was deflected and grabbed by Cannon Hodges in the end zone as time expired. Boy, I felt for Wyowega. I mean, Amherst is undefeated. They're winning all the time, and then now they're getting that kind of win. I mean, something else. I mean, Wyowega obviously played a really good football game. In Amherst, they have not dominated the same way, but they're still 7-0.
Right. I mean, these are the teams in this conference, right? Where we wonder what is the hierarchy after Stratford, and this score surprised me a little bit when I saw it last Friday night. It's so funny. These are things that you practice every week. Oftentimes on Thursday, you do your special teams stuff a lot of times on Monday, just get your reps in, and then when you do your pregame on Thursday, that's one of the things you rep, and it's kind of that danger or fire situation in PAT and field goal when the snap doesn't come back, and you go through you do it every week because that's what you do in football, and you don't give it a ton of thought, because if you think there's going to be an issue, oftentimes you just go for 2 anyway, or you go for it on 4th and short or whatever. But when you're to see it happen like that, and to see it be effective and do it, I don't know if they practice it or if they just had a 4-leaf clover on that part of the field, but good for Amherst and hard luck for Wyowega.
And I guess that's one reason why you put your quarterback as a holder.
Absolutely. You do it all the time. It's kind of that risk reward thing too, because you don't want your quarterback's hand getting schmucked, but oftentimes it's your backup quarterback. But in that situation, right guy at the right spot.
Wittenberg-Burnhamwood, another good win. They defeated Colby 42-20, so Whitburn 5-2, 4-1 in the conference. Colby fighting for a playoff spot. They're 2-5 overall, 2-3 in the conference. Bryson Schmidt, the quarterback, was terrific. 15 rushes, 231 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Chargers pounded the football, 359 yards rushing, 9.9 yards per carry. Boone Shire, again, a kid that we heard about from the coach last week, and he is a tackling machine. He had 16 tackles and a forced fumble for Whitburn. Whitburn looks like a team that's getting better and better.
Right. Yeah, I think this is one, and this was kind of a Colby'd been playing better, so we thought that this would be a good matchup, and I think this kind of too sets aside who is Whitburn, who is Colby this year, kind of like the Amherst Wyowega. Maybe I leave with more question marks. I look at this one and think, all right, Whitburn is definitely heading in the right direction at the right time of year.
And they still have Amherst coming up next week, so
that should be a great one.
Spencer Columbus and Loyal Greenwood each was looking for their first conference win. It turned into a thriller. Spencer Columbus with a fourth quarter touchdown defeats Loyal Greenwood 34-30, but Loyal Greenwood dominated the yardage, 411-256. Kane Tofar had 160 yards and 2 scores. Trent Shield, 95 yards, a couple of scores for Loyal Greenwood. Devin Timler, 9 of 17, 141 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. But those are important games. I mean, sometimes you get this point in the season. We saw it with Eau Claire Memorial and Rapids in the Valley. Here again, these teams fighting and get that taste of victory within the conference is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about this in different programs in different times throughout history, or different times where they're at from year to year. And this is the thing. When you're Loyal Greenwood and Spencer and you're playing Stratford, you're looking for the little victories, right? To get the first downs, to get off the field on third. I mean, just those things, and you can build off of those, and those are things you point out on film the week after. In these games, these are the wins. This is where you're looking for those big victories. These are where the big memories are going to be made because there aren't going to be a lot of wins. So to see these games be close matchups like this, back and forth, that's exciting for both schools. Obviously, better for Spencer Columbus.
CWC Small /Merrillwood. Edgar stays perfect in conference. They have to battle Iola Scandinavia scoreless into the second quarter, but Edgar wins 26-6. Maverick Butt had 102 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he got the first score in the second quarter. A 50-yard punt return for a touchdown. How often do we hear that with Edgar? I mean, that special teams score in a big football game. Gavin Maurer, 6 rushes, 97 yards for Edgar. Billy Myers, 15 rushes, 70 yards, and a touchdown for Iola. 268 to 158 in yardage in favor of Edgar, but two good football teams. I think both teams have a potential of making some noise when we get to the postseason. Yeah,
I saw they interviewed Coach Sins after this game. There's a lot of alumni at this game. I forget what the game was, but they invited a ton of 50th anniversary, whatever. And so kind of neat for those current kids to play in front of a crowd that has those old ones. And,
right.
And we talk about being in year 5 of a program and developing, and he's in year 50 of a program and developing.
I think he's got it set.
Yeah, it's just kind of to hear him talk kind of nonchalantly, not to take anything lightly, but just to kind of say, yeah, I guess it is special for those guys to be back. Yeah, I guess. So just a great program, great win, and good for that community. The role that football program plays in that community is pretty special.
One of the best matchups on the schedule last week was Auburndale and Abbotsford, the A game. In Auburndale, now 6-1, 4-1 in conference. Abbotsford 6-1, 4-1 after Auburndale went to Abbey and won 28-7. Colton Weiler, 24 rushes, 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Blake Robb, 13 rushes, 87 yards and a couple of scores. Irvin Aguilera had 88 yards on 17 rushes for Abbey. The yardage wasn't a huge difference between the teams, but obviously Auburndale was able to finish their drives and earn a very impressive road win.
Yeah, I think those are the things we talk about, right? Like we watch Abbey roll up against some of the maybe lesser teams in the conference and be able to finish those drives. But when we talked a little bit earlier about Eau Claire North and where they are in their program, and I think that's kind of the next step for Abbey, right? If you want to be 1-2 or 1-2-3 in the conference, that's the difference. You roll up a lot of yards from week to week, but it is finishing those drives, whatever it is, whether it's not getting the penalties, not putting yourself behind the sticks, whatever the case may be.
And that was interesting seeing those top 4 teams go up against each other. Those are 4 good teams, and again, I think those teams have potentials for making some runs in the postseason playoffs. It'll be very interesting to see. Pacelli, they're still fighting for a playoff spot. Pacelli got past Rosholt 20-14. Sean Berna fumble return touchdown broke a 14-14 tie midway through the fourth quarter to win it for Pacelli. Bryce Flaker continues to put up big numbers for Pacelli this season. He's been consistently good for Pacelli. He had 20 rushes, 149 yards, and a touchdown. Caleb Zick, 13 rushes, 73 yards for Rosholt, who came up just short in trying to get that first conference win in quite a while.
So I saw with the WIA deadline for football conference realignment came out, and we had already known that Rosholt was going 8-man or applying to go 8-man. Who's the second one? Is it Pacelli or Assumption?
Okay,
I knew it was
but they're going to stay one more year in 11-man, they say, and then go in 26. Rosholt's decided they want to get in next year. And Assumption says because then they will still be playoff eligible. My first thought was, it's nice to be optimistic. I'll say that much. It's nice to be optimistic. I think that maybe they should have probably gone next year. But again, that's not my choice. That's their choice. And Assumption, again, they lost 58-0 to Pittsville last week. Dalton Dard. And welcome back. It is hour number 2 of the Big High School Sports Show on 98.9 WXCO, online at bullfallsradio.com, mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO, and on the Civic Media app, again brought to you by K5 Construction. K5 Construction is a family-owned and operated custom builder in central Wisconsin that stands out from the rest for its commitment to quality and excellence. From design and planning to the final construction, K5 Construction delivers superior results on every project. Coming up here in the second hour, we will finish up our recaps with the 8-player recap, and then we'll look ahead to week number 8 of the regular season. But right now it's time for our student-athlete guest from Newman Catholic High School, senior offensive and defensive lineman Carson Calo. And Carson, number 1, thanks for coming on over.
Thanks, Chad.
Absolutely. And Coach has been saying we needed more linemen this year, so we're bringing in the linemen. And I guess to start things off, you were, and frankly, I don't like scars. Right? Yeah. You were showing us your scar on your arm because you broke your arm last year. You had a bit of an ankle injury last week in the game at Port, a big win for your team. Talk about injuries, because your team, that's sort of been a constant storyline this year, but you've been able to, go through some injuries and then come back. What, as a high school athlete, to be able to, come back from injuries, I imagine those are lessons that are more than athletic lessons, but they're life lessons, right? To suffer a significant arm injury in that game against Tri-County last year, much less severe this year. But talk about coming back from injury, because that's something that I think a lot of people don't really think about, because football players go through a lot.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's kind of weird because most people, you'll get hurt one game. Well, everybody gets a little banged up in football. It's a pretty hard sport.
Stay close to the mic.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's a hard sport. So, I don't know. It's just everybody plays a little sore kind of every game. And everyone's got, that one injury that, you twisted your ankle, in 8th grade, and you always just kind of feel it. But coming back from my arm, I didn't even really, realize it. It didn't hit me until, 2 weeks ago. I was like, oh, I broke my arm last year, and I'm, back over here. And I don't know, a lot of people got a bunch of injuries that they just came back, and it just shows how tough you can really be. That really reveals some character there.
First off, I like your scar. I like that, and that's one of the reasons I like linemen, because linemen have cool scars, and usually those pretty guys don't. Quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, no. But how has your experience of getting injured, a major injury, and kind of battling back from that, has that allowed you to be a better leader this year, as you guys have experienced so many injuries as a team?
Yeah, I feel like it's a big point, because I don't really bring it up much about my arm, but it's just kind of if you can't go full speed right now, I'll look at some of these guys who have never gotten hurt before. If you can't go full speed right now, you don't, really appreciate it, because that, your season could be done at any moment. Quincy, the first game of this year, he didn't think that he was going to be out for the rest of the season. That was big. He only played a half. And, that's happened to a lot of our guys where they're just out. And
getting younger kids, probably in particular, to understand too. And you guys have had serious injuries, so serious injury is a serious injury. But football is a game where there's going to be some aches and pains, right? Just from the normal course of practicing every day, and your body getting worn down, and especially you linemen are in the trenches, right? Lots of one-on-one drills and a lot of big bodies moving each other around in there. So part of it. Is it getting guys to understand the difference between pain and injury and being able to play through some things?
Yeah, like I said earlier, you're going to get banged up, so you got to just learn how to work through it. And then when you get home, ice it, maybe take some ibuprofen the next day at practice. But just taking care of yourself is a really big thing, especially in the trenches.
5-1 so far this season, and as you said, you lost Quincy Fender right away, and then they just kept on coming. And you're on your 4th quarterback this season, and there's been injuries outside the quarterback position as well, because I think one of the things that maybe people don't realize is for a school the size of Newman Catholic, when somebody goes down, it's basically 2 guys going down, because of most, like yourself, 2-way players. what has been within the locker room for you and your teammates that's allowed you to continue to focus on getting the job done each week, to give yourself an opportunity, if you're able to keep on winning, to make another playoff berth? What was the discussions like when these injuries started early this season, and what has allowed this team to stay together to be successful up to this point?
Yeah, well, those first 2 games we had, obviously Quincy's ankle, and then Tristan Fisher broke his collarbone, 5 concussions. It was more of just because those first 2 teams, Phillips and Alma Bancroft, they're pretty physical teams. So at halftime, we're just play for each other, finish your blocks, keep your head on a swivel, just make sure that you're there for each other because these guys are going to be coming real fast.
One of the things we talk about all the time with 8-man football, and we joke around a lot this year about having linemen on, and knock on wood, your linemen have been pretty healthy this year. Chad just asked our coach guest from SPASH to talk about the team and the players and how they're so effective in their passing game. And when you talk pass or short passing game, when you talk that, everyone automatically thinks quarterback, receiver, running back. But what really makes those things tick is the linemen. He said they have 3 all-conference linemen back. So when you look at the success you guys have been able to have, part of it's being healthy on the line this year, but a lot of times when you hear 8-man football, you think big passing yards, big running yards, high scores, lots of touchdown. What is the significance and the importance of the role of linemen in 8-man football?
Well, I mean, obviously we lose some width in the field, and there's a lot that we need to really pick up. Usually in 8-man, it's just a 3-man line, and then sometimes the defense will run a 4-man. You really got to, just pay attention and make sure you know what to do on how to block to make sure that everybody's, safe, and then make sure we have the call-outs from our running back and our quarterback so everybody knows what's going on. We really got to be really smart.
So is there a lot, and I don't think parents sitting in the stands necessarily, they don't hear it, but I don't know how much they understand it too. There's a lot of communication that happens before the ball is snapped on just about every play, right? Can you talk about that a little bit? Between the linemen, you said running backs, quarterbacks. What types of things are you guys talking about out there?
Right, so we'll be listening to the play, and then we'll hear if it's a pass or a run, and then we'll see where it's going. Depending on what kind of line they have out there, we'll call if we're going to the right or if we're going to the left, who we're leaving, who's going to get a blitzer, especially call out who we have, and see if the running back is staying to block, just making sure that everyone is accounted for so we can mainly get to a one-on-one between the ball carrier and the defender.
We're talking to Carson Calo from Newman Catholic High School here on the Big High School Sports Show, brought to you by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO. So often we talk about having experience being able to help an individual player. You, as part of that line, is an experienced line. You've got guys you've played with for multiple years now. Number one, talk about your line mates. And number two, talk about having a line that's back together as a whole, how much of an advantage that is, that you guys have played together quite a bit. How much of an advantage is it to have not just you having experience, but having the guys around you have experience as well?
Yeah, so I play center, and then on my right we've got Greg Zabrowski, and on my left we got Evan Graney. I mean, those guys, I've been playing, those guys, the 2 of them have been on this line with me ever since we were in middle school. I mean, we've always been there for each other, and somebody goes down, we make sure we know exactly what to say to each other to get each other fired up, make sure we're okay. And, I mean, it's just that little bit of chemistry, and we're really with the whole team, but especially with the linemen, that is just so important on, just to win.
What about playing on the defensive side of the football? You said the center on the offense side, but you're also on the defensive side of the football. You're as big of a factor, I think, on both sides of the ball. Talk a little bit about the defense, because I thought last week in that game against Port, the defense was outstanding. I mean, going into that game, you looked at some of the numbers that Port had put up, big plays on offense, and be able to throw the ball and run the ball. You shut them out in the first half, and then were able to hold on in the second half. I mean, I think it was a case where it's hard to keep a team like that down for 4 complete quarters. What was the key on the defensive side of the football last week in that game against Port?
It was just really big, making sure everybody's got their keys, going to the right gaps, and just honestly just making sure that you're ready for the ball. Like we said, my ankle. I didn't play defense the second quarter, but Greg came in and played end for me, and he did just as well. He knew exactly where to go. he was studying like his playbook all week, and it's just really good that we all know that we got to just be ready to go in at any point.
I was talking to actually the coach of Port Edwards a few weeks ago, and they had switched from 11-man to 8-man, and he was telling me one of the biggest challenges that they have that he's found doing it differently is on the defensive side of the ball, because the offenses can be so dynamic and do things so differently from week to week. When you think about playing both ways from week to week, what is more of a challenge week in and week out, preparing offensively or preparing defensively for the game?
I would say probably preparing defensively, because, I mean, really, you can really cram it up the middle any way you want, because you can bring up a running back and block and have a wide open hole. Like, if you have like an all right defense, it's really hard to be able to stop people, because it can either go really well for your defense or really bad, because they could just easily kick it out to the outside and then have a big gain because, I don't know, someone gave up.
We'll talk more about football in just a few minutes, but let's step away from the gridiron a little bit. Are you involved in any other sports?
Yeah, I throw shot and disc in the spring.
Could you compare football and track? Because they're obviously very different. I mean, it's you're still part of a team in track, but there's an individual aspect to that. How do you like that, having that individual portion that you can focus on?
Yeah, there's obviously a difference between a football game day and, I don't know, on the bus for a track meet. I mean, the entire environment's different. It's way more social on track, but I feel like I'm a little more focused on football. And I don't know. Like,
how's the coach different? Because you have the same coach.
The same coach, yeah. And this year we actually have the same line and throwing coach, so it's.
You said it's a little bit more. I don't get the sense that Micklig would ever be kind of laid back. The intensity would still be there.
Yeah, he's definitely still making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do.
So you spend a ton of time preparing offensively, defensively during football season. I know how busy you are, good student athlete. What do you do when you have a little free time? What do you like to do when football's not on your brain for a couple hours?
That doesn't really happen. Well, I usually lift, make sure that I'm keeping up with everything in school, and on the weekends I like to serve at Mass.
Nice.
Do you have a favorite class in school?
Oof, probably English class. I love my English class with Mr. Knoll.
Another coach on the Newman staff. Do you have any plans to continue to go to school after high school?
Yeah, I was thinking about maybe either general business management or like construction management at UW Stout, and I might be able to throw there.
Okay, I was going to ask you not thinking about continuing on the football side, but track and field.
I would like to play football, but I'm 5'7", so I don't know how well I would do at lineman. So
coaches will always look for the right guys, no matter what the size, right? There,
absolutely. And 5'7", probably closer on defense than offense. But if you got a motor, shot or disc?
I prefer disc, but I find that usually I don't know. It's kind of a toss up. It goes from week to week.
Let's look ahead now to the last two games of the season, because something that people don't kind of realize with 8-player, because I posted something earlier in the week, and I said, well, we have 3 teams that we cover here, and I said all 3 of the teams need to win this week. And somebody said, well, hasn't Newman already qualified for the playoffs? Well, no, because there's nobody that does get automatic qualifying for the playoffs in 8-player football. You have to, every game counts, even the non-conference games count. To make the playoffs in 8-player football is not easy. There's 16 teams that get in, and it's getting tougher and tougher every year. What is the mindset going into these last 2 games? Is there more excitement? Is it just a building excitement? Is it the same as it's been throughout the season? What's the feeling here going into the last 2 weeks of the season?
I would say it's more excitement, basically, off of how many people we've lost this year and all the adversity that we've had to overcome, and it just feels good to get in the playoffs, obviously. And Newman's been in the playoffs every year since they joined 8-man, so it's just nice to carry on that legacy. And to get there, we got to win out, so get 7-1, and it's going to be hard.
Special week this week because it's homecoming, right?
Right.
And also senior day, is that correct?
Yeah, senior day.
How do you look at that being the last home game that you're going to play there?
It's so weird. I mean, it really feels like yesterday I was a little freshman first coming out on the field and not knowing really anything about the game of football.
What do you take away from being part of the program when it won those state championships?
I really enjoyed it, obviously, because I get a cool medal. And then, I don't know, I feel like it was a big part because it was obviously those guys, those starters who really made it happen. But I feel like it's also the scout team that was there, and I was obviously a part of that. It's just kind of special to be there.
How does that? I love that you say that, because you're right. There is no football without a good scout team. And when you have your banquet at the end of the year, and you talk about your most valuable players and all that, sorry, excuse me, those guys play a huge role. So knowing that you used to be on that scout team, what's your relationship like now, being the big man on campus or big man on the line for multiple years? What is your relationship with those scout team guys?
I mean, it's kind of tough this year because they haven't had any JV games, and a lot of these guys are brand new because there's only one sophomore, and he was hurt last year. So a lot of these guys, this is like their first time playing football, and they have no experience in game. So I really try not to be so hard on them, make sure they're going full speed, make sure I'm giving them a good look too, because they really need to step up next year.
What are the keys this week against Tri-County? You've obviously been preparing this week, looking at film, hearing the scouting report from the coaches. Do you have what are the big points of emphasis in order to be successful against a team that's only lost one game?
We really got to stay focused, especially with that being homecoming week. We got to just make sure that everybody's really just into the game and make sure they don't get outside.
Coach, anything else before we get to our final question?
No, it's been awesome to watch you guys this year. I know when Chad asks earlier, when the person or the community member asked, well, doesn't Newman already have it clinched? I think you guys have created that, right? I mean, with the success you've had and the tradition in your program, and people just automatically assume that it's easy, and it comes that way every year. So you guys have faced a lot of adversity, so congratulations on getting this far, and good luck with these last 2 weeks.
And we got one final question here. We always ask our student-athlete guest, and especially a senior who's been around the block a couple of times and obviously with multiple sports. As you finish up your high school athletic career at the end of track this year, based on what you've learned, based around the people that you've been around for the last 4 years, for a younger person that is just joining the athletic program, whether in football or track and field at Newman Catholic, what piece of advice would you give? Something you've learned over these 4 years that you could hand over to a younger person that's just starting their journey, maybe that little piece that they should think about as they start that journey?
I don't know. I would just say probably just make sure that you do everything you're supposed to do the right thing. Just try and be a good player, but also maintain being a good person, and just have fun with it, ultimately. Just have some fun with it, because if you have fun, you'll probably be pretty good.
We only go through it once, so you may as well have some fun while doing it, right?
Yeah.
Carson Calo, thank you. I appreciate it. Always try to make sure. Oh, I got to ask you one more thing. You got a chance to kick an extra point last week.
Yep, I got one chance.
That didn't go so well.
No, it didn't. He said he'd give me one shot, and if I missed, we're done. And there it went.
We're done?
Yeah, that's it. He said we're done.
I will say you got a unique style.
Thank you.
But no, it's been I always like when I get on the field, and you always want me to make it one of my pregame pictures. I try to take a picture of you kicking the football. So
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chad.
Carson, thanks again, and good luck the rest of the way.
Thank you.
Carson Calo, student-athlete guest this week on the Big High School Sports Show. Again, brought to you by K5 Construction, a family-owned and operated custom builder in central Wisconsin that stands out from the rest for its commitment to quality and excellence. From design and planning to the final construction, K5 Construction delivers superior results on every project. Back with more coming up. Big High School Sports Show on 98.9 WXCO.
Some wild results in Week 7 football, including 4 games decided on a last-second field goal. I'm Travis Wilson, and this is a WisSports.net Minute brought to you by Just a Game Fieldhouse in Wisconsin Dells. More high school sports news after this. You may have heard of Just a Game Fieldhouse in Wisconsin Dells, one of the country's premier destinations for youth sports and events, but did you know that Just a Game does so much more? Just a Game also delivers end-to-end apparel, equipment, and event solutions. With their state-of-the-art screen printing and embroidery facility, they can help with branding for your team and business items, including uniforms, apparel, and more. Just a Game also offers digital services that include a cashless digital platform and event live streaming. Just a Game has also added a second brand new facility in Reedsburg. Find more information at justagame.com. It was quite a week 7 of the high school football season, including a quartet of game-winning field goals in the closing seconds. Neenah took down Kimberly 29-28 as Jack Klutt booted a 29-yarder with just 10 seconds remaining to hand the Rockets their first win over the Papermakers since 2006. Bayport's Beckett Corton completed a wild comeback for the Pirates with a 35-yard field goal at the buzzer to keep the team unbeaten in FRCC North play, defeating De Pere 19-17. Wausau East is on the brink of its first playoff appearance since 2012, as Gio Gomez made a 29-yard field goal with less than a minute remaining to defeat Merrill 16-14. Richland Center's Grayson Banker delivered a 21-20 homecoming victory over rival River Valley for a 21-20 win. Speaking of rivalries, the state's most played rivalry is no longer tied, as Reedsburg put a running clock on Baraboo in a 42-7 win, as the Beavers take a 66-65-6 advantage in the battle for the Old River Jug. In other gridiron action, Racine Case shut out Oak Creek 27-0 for the first win over the night since 2005. Waguanago handed Oconomowoc its first loss and forced a 3-way tie atop the Classic 8 standings. Lomira knocked off St. Mary Springs 21-7 on Friday. On Saturday, Regis downed Stanley Boyd 35-25 in a battle of unbeatens. This has been a WisSports.net Minute. Check us out online at WisSports.net.
And welcome back. Big High School Sports Show brought to you by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO, BullFallsRadio.com, mobile devices, and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Thanks again to our guests, including our student-athlete guest, Carson Calo. And again, it's just, it's always fun to have these kids that are, very personable and be able to talk about their experiences and just really enjoy getting a chance to kind of delve in a little bit and even give him a poke about his kicking.
Yeah, I told him when we got off air that that's probably one of the best answers we've ever gotten about advice you can give a younger player.
That was how you going to say about the kicking.
Oh, as succinct and positive as possible, right? Mm-hmm. Work hard, have fun, and be a good person. And that's pretty darn good advice for anything you're going to do in life. So that was, I think Calo's a great leader and a great young man and a huge asset to Coach Micklig and Newman Catholic.
In addition to football, we'll get to the 8-player coming up. There's also other sports that are heading towards the playoffs. And in fact, got a note that Talia Schlinwein from Wausau East, part of the Wausau Golf team, was the low individual at sectional qualifying at Thornberry Creek Golf Club. It had a score of 77. Talia plays again for the co-op. It's a Wausau co-op, right? Yeah. For East and West, yeah. From Wausau East, and she'll be heading to state next week. So again, we don't talk enough, I think, about some of the other sports that are going on. Obviously, we kind of focus on the gridiron here during the fall, but a lot going on as we get towards the postseason.
So state golf next week, state. So today was sectionals for tennis, so state tennis next week as well. So yeah, things are moving fast and wrapping up, and it's been a great season. And I was talking to Coach Tim Kostrowski, who coaches football, wrestling, and track and teaches at West, but coaches all those at our middle school, John Muir. Their last game was last night against Horseman, 7th and 8th grade, but they went an entire season without raining during practice one time. I mean, that is, when you think about the spring we had last year when we went an entire spring with it not raining, or with it raining yes. every day. So pretty remarkable that you could go through an entire season The grass doesn't like it, but
it has not been. By this point, we've usually experienced one night where you're bundled up with the sleet coming down. We have not had that.
Yeah, it
so
is.
far.
It's starting to feel a little cooler. 35 when walking the dog this morning, and
that's true.
And bringing a sweatshirt along to the games at least. But yeah, I think it's still in the 70s on Friday and Saturday this weekend. So
let's talk a little bit about 8-player. We just did with Carson Calo from Newman Catholic, and that was a huge win last week. They defeated Port Edwards 20-16. Both teams came in at 4-1. It was a massive game in terms of playoffs. Really, like this week. This week, the winner, when they take on Tri-County, will probably have a good chance to make the playoffs. They'll keep it in their own hands, and the loser will be in trouble. And it was the same way last week. They had to go to Port against a good football team and found a way. It was a great, I thought, offensive and defensive game plan for the Cards. Carson Rice was 12 of 18, 172 yards, a touchdown and an interception, 16 rushes, 86 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. Everett Pent, 26 rushes, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Max Michaels, 11 of 22, 244 yards, 2 touchdowns. Brendan Beck, 9 catches, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns for Port Edwards. And the Cardinals, they had a 4-point lead late in the game. And it was, I was driving back from Port to Wausau to Tom Field. And I got there, I was in the booth, I had the app on, listening to the end of the broadcast. And again, one of the things about 8-player football is the ability to use the rules, to be able to be able to have that special play. And Mickleg came up with a huge play late in that game, threw a pass to Evan Graney, our guest lineman again, but lined up in a legal position in 8-player football, and was able to get a big first down, help them run out the clock and earn the win. Just a really entertaining football game, a nail-biter, and a huge win. And again, for what Newman has gone through so far this season, to go down on the road and to win that game and keep the hopes of continuing their stretch of making the playoffs in 8-player every year since they've joined, it was just really a fantastic win. And again, I just had a chance to see these guys, Mickleg on the offense, Carl Thorpe on the defense. I thought the game plans were outstanding. The execution by these young men were outstanding. And I know I'm sounding like a big homer here, but again, when you see what they've gone through in order to keep on winning these games, they put themselves behind the 8 ball with that game earlier against Almond, where the injuries just came fast and furious, couldn't even finish the game, but somehow been able to continue to win. It's just been, I think, some of the best in terms of high school athletics.
And it's what they're doing. It's also interesting. We've talked a lot about this on the show, about the fact that only 16 teams make the playoffs and how much more competitive that makes it. And on the flip side, I mean, if you end up being a 2 or 3 loss team, that's a tough pill to swallow when you look at the 11-man teams who all make it. But at the same time, there's a fair amount of people out there who make the argument that they'd like to see 11-man football go back that direction to make those playoffs more competitive. So you balance it out. You find a way for everybody to play 1 or 2 more games in a system like that. But if you think about how much more meaningful these games are in weeks 7 and 8 for them, 8 and 9 for other schools, because every single one matters, as opposed to, we got our 6 wins, so we're going to work hard and we want to win every game, but it doesn't carry as much weight. I think it probably adds to the experience and the excitement and the viewership and just kind of from the fans and the school and all that. So there's definitely some give and take, but it definitely makes for a more exciting atmosphere and that each game and then each play within that game, each mistake within that game carries a little more weight with it.
Basically the same discussion people have with the expansion of the college football playoff. Again, about making all these regular season games have the utmost importance. And it reminds me of a conversation we had last year with a guest who suggested that everybody make the playoffs. And I think me and you both agreed that would be by far the worst of the choices you could make. I would rather see them go from 32 to 16 teams or 24. I mean, you can have, some sort of bye system or something like that. I mean, there's different ways of doing it where you would have, I think, again, when we talk about level 1 in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a lot of running clocks. I mean, it's just the way it's been. And but to go the other direction, to have everybody, and that would lead to at least another week of poor matchups.
It's interesting. you talked college, Major League Baseball right now with what happened to the Brewers. The exact same conversations are going on, right? Should it be more teams? Should it be less teams? How do you win your division? But you're in a 3-game. You know what I mean? So
I know
nobody seems to have quite figured it out yet.
They added that wild card, so now a division champion had to play the wild card.
Right.
And unfortunately, it was the Milwaukee Brewers. So
yeah,
you're exactly right. But no, I think that these are discussions, but the thing about it is, and I think in terms of high school sports, when we've seen the expansion of like basketball and some other sports from 4 to 5 divisions, I argued that you should have gone from 4 to 3 and then just had 8 teams from each division. You actually have more teams make it to the state tournament, but I just have a hard time believing that the WIAA would ever contract playoffs. It doesn't happen. They always seem to add more instead of.
I agree. And if you look at something also like boys hockey that went from 1 to 2, and then there's the people on each side of that. I mean, a lot of those smaller enrollment teams or whatever are now having the opportunity to make it to state, and the people on the other side would maybe argue that maybe it's a little more watered down, that maybe some of those teams don't. You know what I mean?
So
yeah. But so like no matter what, like you and I know all the right answers and nobody asks us, but no matter what it is, I mean, it's just so big, right? There's so many football teams that and the opinions and the beliefs fall all over the map. So making a change or making decisions is not a simple task.
Exactly. Also in 8-player football, Athens is still looking for their first win, and they play a lot of tough teams, I tell you. Sometimes, as we talked about, it's sometimes the schedule. It's sometimes where you are. And Athens has been competitive in most of their games, but they just can't win, and they fell to Phillips, who's 5-1. Their only loss came back in week 1 to Newman. Phillips is not eligible for the playoffs. Again, that's part of the 8-player puzzle that I don't think a lot of people understand. If you have more than 200 kids in your high school, you're not eligible for the playoffs in 8-player football. But Phillips defeated Athens 38-24. Phillips ran the ball very well, 365 yards rushing, 11.1 yards per carry. Camden Zarnke was 11 of 21, 85 yards, a touchdown, 20 rushes, 70 yards, a touchdown for Athens as well. Some other games involved with 8-player. Rib Lake defeated Flambeau by a score of 50-6. Rib Lake, their move to 8 players has been very successful so far this year. They are now 4-2. Flambeau 3-3. Owen Withy has been. I tell you, should the Cardinals win the next 2 weeks, I hope that on Saturday morning, a week from Saturday, we do not see a trip to Owen Withy coming in, because I mean, it's just they have been just so dominant so recently, shutout after shutout, and putting up 60, 70 points, 76-0 over Lake Holcomb last week. Gilman 5-1, another team looking towards the playoffs, I think at this point. 54-8 over Alma Center Lincoln, and Thorpe keeping their playoffs alive, 58-6 over Cornell. And by the way, you were mentioning tennis. Coach Mickleg, who looks at the big picture, because it's not just football. Over at Newman, he's very proud of everybody at Newman. He says that the Newman tennis team made it to state as a team for the second time only in school history. So congratulations to the Newman Cardinal. And they see what happens? You build new courts, you make it to state.
If you build it, they will come.
You get more practice time. You got a nice place right on campus. Yeah, and they go into the state tournament as a team for only the second time in state history. And see, I like this. Ian and his dad gave us the information about the golf, and Coach Mickleg giving us the information about the tennis. It's nice to know that people out there caring about this.
Absolutely.
That's what we like to see. So we're going to come back in 1 minute, and we're going to look ahead. And boy, you said it. We got some big games coming up. We're going to talk about the week 8 action coming up next. With Jason Foster, I'm Chad Holmes. It is the Big High School Sports Show, brought to you by K5 Construction on 98.9 WXCO. On Saturday, it's homecoming for the Newman Catholic High School football team as the Cardinals play host to Tri-County. Hear all the exciting action live on 98.9 and 1230 WXCO. Online at BullFallsRadio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. Coverage begins with the pregame show at 12:35 and the opening kickoff at 1. Newman Catholic High School football on 98.9 WXCO is brought to you by Red Robin Restaurants, the Clover Bell Credit Union, Sun Printing, and North Star Restoration. It's Newman Catholic hosting Tri-County in high school football. Saturday, starting with the pregame show at 12:35 and the opening kickoff at 1 p.m. on your home for Fighting Cardinal Sports, 98.9 and 1230 WXCO. Online at BowFallsRadio.com. Mobile devices and Alexa by searching WXCO and on the Civic Media app. And welcome back. It is the Big High School Sports Show, brought to you by K5 Construction, a family-owned and operated custom builder in central Wisconsin that stands out from the rest for its commitment to quality and excellence. From design and planning to final construction, K5 Construction delivers superior results on every project. Do you have any other results to report there?
Not yet. Efforting.
There you go. Busy day in high school sports with the tennis sectionals going on as well. But let's look ahead to this week's action in high school football, the penultimate weekend of the high school football season. Wisconsin Valley Conference, Big Rivers Conference East showdown likely for the championship. Stevens Point 5-2 overall. DC Everest 5-2 overall. Both 4-0 in the conference. Of course, SPASH looking for a second straight league title behind quarterback Grant Schodenaw. Everest has a great quarterback as well, Logan George. You talk about the battle for first team all conference. I think both have great resumes. Game is at steam. Last season, Everest had the ball and a chance to win it in Stevens Point. What do you think?
I don't know. I think it's going to be a great game. I think they have very similar offenses with the exception of, if you want to compare last year to this year, that maybe Everest has the greater big play potential. When you look at Xavier Edwards as kind of their big play receiver, and that's one piece of the puzzle that SPASH maybe hasn't replaced from last year, but they're doing things differently. Their quarterback's running the ball a lot more, but their running back and Bankston, they're also probably competing for running back of their
offensive player of the year.
Offensive player of the year.
Yeah,
and I mean, candidates. So a lot of candidate stats. And at the end of the day, kind of like the Everest game with Chippewa last week, probably comes down to mistakes, right? Probably comes down to turnovers and special teams and big plays. And I think the team that plays this one more cleanly probably is your conference champ.
Wausau West at Eau Claire Memorial, a game that I'll have live here on 98.9 WXCO, BowFallsRadio.com, and the Civic Media app. West looking to get back on the winning track, help their playoff hopes. The Warriors have struggled in the last 2 weeks and losses to Stevens Point and Marshfield. Offense has scored only 24 total points in those two games. Memorial comes in after earning their first win, 30-22 at Rapids last week. Obviously, Memorial has been a team that's moved the ball, but they have not stopped anybody. And for the Warriors, maybe that's what they need. They need to get that offense going again. Yeah,
I know that they'll have a great crowd over there. I mean, this is our second trip to Carson Park this year for the Warriors, but I think this one probably comes down to defense. I think obviously the Warriors are looking to get back on track on offense, but Eau Claire Memorial does some things offensively that is a little bit unique and that we haven't seen since earlier in the season, where they run a lot of plays, they kind of do some hurry up, no huddle stuff. So how we adjust to that, I think, is going to play a big role in the outcome of this game.
Other games in the WVC BRC East, Eau Claire North at Marshfield. In Marshfield, they find a way against the Huskies. They would clinch a playoff berth.
Yeah, and we sit here at the end of week 2 going into week 3. I don't think that's a prediction we probably would have made. So a nice job for Coach Gadel. But at the same time, Eau Claire North, I think, is still a program that's looking for a signature win. And I think they probably weren't going to get it against the Everests and the Spashes of the world, but this is probably one that they look at and say that this would be a really nice win for them. I mean, Marshfield's certainly favored, but if all things go well for Eau Claire North, they're bound and determined to pick up a big win.
Wisconsin Rapids at New Richmond, 0-7 versus 7-0.
Not great, I would say, for the Red Raiders of Rapids, and New Richmond is kind of on their path to. I mean, this one is not a conference game for them, but crossover for playoffs. But This is one that they would like to have that no blemishes on that record when
Yeah.
it comes to seeding in 2 weeks.
Great Northern Conference, a good one in Lakeland, Minocqua, as the Thunderbirds host Wausau East. East 4-3, 3-2. Lakeland 4-3, 2-3. So Lakeland needs this one. After that win against Merrill last week, East has a chance to clinch their first playoff appearance since 2012 with a win at Lakeland. The Lumberjacks that moved the ball through the air with Davis Winter and on the ground with the install. But Lakeland, they had that 36-33 win against Antigo last week, and again, they need it big time. So that's a very interesting matchup.
Yeah, and I think the fact that this one is at Lakeland maybe works in Lakeland's favor a little bit. I know East struggled when they went up to Rhinelander earlier in the season with that road game. So this should be interesting. I think that it's a tough one to call with Lakeland's injuries, and East would like this one, definitely clinch a playoff berth with it. And unfortunately, I was standing on the sideline as defensive coordinator in 2012 when East clinched their last playoff berth on the other side of the field.
Sad memories.
Yeah,
Sad
thanks. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Chad.
I actually, now that you bring it up, I remember that game as well. And that was a game that West actually dominated.
Yes.
I mean, you dominated that football game, and somehow East in the end pulled it out.
Logan Taylor caught a nice touchdown at the end of that one. And
The things that one remembers
Yes.
when you brought it. I did not remember that until you just mentioned it. Yeah, that was a game that was like, holy cow. Like,
Coach Young, who's at Nina,
I
wasn't
know.
it? That was
That's
leading the
right.
Lumberjacks
That's right.
at that time. So.
Holy cow, but chance for the first in a dozen years for East. Antigo and Mosinee. Antigo, they're playing for a playoff spot. They need to find at least one more win. And Mosinee playing for an opportunity to win a conference championship. Antigo 4-3 overall, 2-3 in the conference. Mosinee 5-2 overall, 4-1 in the conference. Mosinee 1 game back of Medford. They play Medford next week, so they got to win in order to make sure that they have a chance for at least a share of the conference championship next week. Mosinee defensively was very good last week against Rhinelander. Rhinelander's been struggling a bit offensively, but Mosinee was able to win on the road 26-6. Treve Stoffel continues to be the engine for that Mosinee offense. 273 yards and 3 touchdowns last week. And, of course, Brady Locken, as we mentioned, had a massive night with 6 catches, 144 yards. Antigo, Colton Tomei has been the offensive spark for the Robins, 558 yards passing, 443 yards rushing on the season. Antigo says, I've been just, it's always interesting. They did lose. I mean, after they lost to Merrill 31-0, I thought, well, that's it. They're going to, but the last 2 weeks, they played good football. They won the Bell game, and they went on the road and almost pulled it out up in Minocqua. But Mosinee, that's a tough trip for Antigo.
It's definitely a tough trip for Antigo. I think for both teams at this stage of the season, it's probably one of those measuring stick games because Mosinee wants to come in and dominate and show Medford that they're ready for their Week 9 battle and that they've kind of fixed since that blip on the screen against East a few weeks ago that they're ready to roll. And I think Antigo's been playing good football, and this isn't one that they probably circled on their calendar or scheduled to win, but they've been playing good football. And if they can come in this game and compete hard and make it a football game, I think to them that also is another sign that their program's heading in the right direction.
Saturday afternoon, Merrill, for the third straight week, plays a Saturday afternoon game. They will host Tomahawk. Tomahawk 2-5, 1-4 in the conference. Merrill 4-3, 2-3 in the conference. The Jays, boy, they had to be licking their wounds. They were so close to getting what would have been a massive win at Tom Field last week, except for the made field goal. Merrill will welcome back quarterback Aiden Lonsdorf, who missed last week's game. E.J. Wykes did step in ably at quarterback and continues to lead the Merrill defense. Had 7 tackles and an interception last week. And for Tomahawk, I mean, if you get to 3-4, there's a pretty decent chance you get to the playoffs. So both teams still playing for that postseason opportunity.
Yeah, and Tomahawk has definitely shown some signs of life. They've definitely shown the ability to run the football well, which I think is one of the things that East did well against them for most of the game last Saturday. So I think if nothing else, Tomahawk's ability to run the ball makes this a football game. I don't think this is going to be a runaway game. I think it should be close, and I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, good gosh, if Tomahawk pulls that one off, that's a huge win for their program as a small school in this conference, and pretty exciting for them. But Merrill also has some things to say, right? They've done some things good in the year. They made some foolish mistakes 2 weeks ago that cost them some of their players. So I think this is an opportunity for them to get back on the right track.
And Rhinelander at Medford, and Rhinelander, I think they expected to make the playoffs this year. They started off with a couple of non-conference wins, but have not been able to do it in the GNC. They're 1-4 in the conference. Medford, of course, has been dominant in the conference. They're 5-0 in the league, 6-1 overall. Rhinelander has not been able to put up the points, and with Medford being able to run the football, it just looks like a very tough matchup for the Hodags.
Yeah, and I think it makes you wonder too, and where your program's at. And I have no idea. Yeah. Maybe they have some injuries and that sort of thing in Rhinelander. But going back to how they became 2-0, they played the two teams that left the conference that wanted to get out, and the GNC wasn't sad to see them leave, so they probably didn't set themselves up from a standpoint of challenging themselves with some tough games. Unlike Merrill, who we looked at and played. Who did they play early? Really tough matchup from the western half of the state. Who gave it to them the year before, but kind of set them in motion to have some wins at the beginning of the year. Osceola.
I knew it was. I kept having Onalaska in my head, but I knew it wasn't them.
Medford goes to Onalaska.
It was an O. Exactly right. CWC Large, another game of the week possibility. The Battle of Unbeatens. Amherst at Stratford. They're both 7-0, 5-0 in the conference. But it's two teams that have done it differently. But in the end, bottom line is 7-0. Stratford has been dominant all season long. Jack Tubbs putting up huge numbers at quarterback recently with more than 700 yards passing in the last 3 weeks, hitting more than 75% of his passes in those games. Amherst comes in after that miracle win last week. And generally, they have, even 2 weeks ago against, I think it was Spencer Columbus, it was scoreless at halftime. So everything seems to point. Games in Stratford, I'm curious to see if Medford has another gear, to be honest with you, because they find ways to win. And sometimes those teams do have that little bit of extra when they need it, don't they?
Right. I mean, we've talked about it all year that Stratford is a machine, but at the end of the day, when you come in unbeaten like this, you're right. It doesn't matter how you won those games. It's that you won those games. Yeah. And obviously this has become quite the rivalry game between these two programs over the last years, and I think it's set up to be a really good game. I would be surprised if it is a really good game, because I think Stratford is just so good right now, but we know anything can happen. And I think the team that probably watches this one the closely is Whitburn, because that will very much feed into what that Week 9 matchup between them, how they come out of this Stratford game for Amherst, and Wittenberg kind of ready to maybe take an opportunity to steal one at the end.
And Wittenberg-Burnham, I think, hoping that they don't have to get banged up this week with Marathon coming to town, and Marathon 2-5, 1-4 in league. Whitburn 5-2, 4-1 in league. It's a game that will air live on the Sports 2 stream of BullFallsRadio.com and the Civic Media app, and on delay following the Wausau West game here on 98.9 WXCO on Friday night. The Chargers, again, they try to keep those slim conference title hopes alive. Again, the Raiders has battled injury and illness and losing their last 4 games, and they'll have to try to slow down Bryson Schmidt. Again, we heard from the coach last week about real good athlete, and looks like, again, a first-year quarterback, he's getting better and better and putting up massive numbers. Get 231 yards against Colby. That's not a pushover team. That's very impressive.
Yeah, and I think that they are kind of like you said, or we've talked about, setting themselves up at the right time of the year, playing their best football in the last few weeks and ready to make a run in the playoffs.
Other CWC large games have Spencer Columbus taking on Colby. Spencer Columbus 2-5, 1-4. Colby playing for a playoff berth, 2-5, 2-3, and then Wyowega Fremont. That must not have been a fun bus ride home from Amherst last week after having that massive win on their fingertips. But they're still very much in the playoff race. They're 3-4 overall, 2-3 in the conference, and they are at Loyal Greenwood, 1-6, 0-5. So again, I think Colby and White Fremont. You have Amherst, you have Stratford, you have Whitburn. Pretty good chance we're going to see 5 of those teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to not a good conference, and I think it prepares them well for postseason play.
CWC Small / Merriwood, Edgar 6-1, 5-0 in the conference, hosting Pacelli 2-4, 2-3 in the conference. So Pacelli needs a win in their hopes of earning a playoff spot, but going into Edgar is not the place you want to have to win a football game. Edgar did have their toughest league battle last week in that 26-6 win over Iola Scandinavia. Maverick Butt had a good game. Bryce Flaker's been very good for Pacelli, but Edgar, that's a tough nut to crack for the Pacelli Cardinals.
Yeah, that's one where, as coaches, it's a tough week to prepare if you're Pacelli, because you kind of come in with goals and plans, and then you kind of want to make sure that your kids are prepared for what they're getting themselves into.
You got a couple of games that I don't think, on paper look to be competitive. You got Abbotsford trying to bounce back from their first loss, 6-1, 4-1 in the conference at Rosholt, 1-6, 0-5 in their final season of 11-player football. Auburndale at Assumption, obviously, used to be a very competitive Cloverwood Conference matchup, and right now Assumption struggling winless, and Auburndale playing great football, 6-1, 4-1. But the game that I think, again, it has the potential, I think, of being competitive in Pittsville. They're 2-5, 2-3. Again, I think they're going to find a third win next week in the conference, but they would love to get a third win this week. Iola, 5-2, 3-2. Again, I'm curious to see if Pittsville can give Iola a pretty good game, but Iola, in their non-games against teams such as Edgar and Abbotsford, have put up massive offensive numbers.
Right. Yep. I think that this is Iola. I mean, they're now playing for seeding, right?
Yeah.
So these wins are important ones for them, and I would imagine they're going to keep their foot on the gas.
8-player football, and again, a big one that we will have live Saturday right here on 98.9 WXCO, BullFallsRadio.com, and on the Civic Media app. You got Tri-County, 5-1. 4-1 in the conference. Newman Catholic, 5-1, 4-1 in the conference. The winner keeps on track for a playoff spot, while the loser is maybe out. I don't like to make definitive statements on it, but it'll make it a lot more difficult. Newman comes off a big road win, 20-16 over Port Edwards. The Cards keep winning despite being forced to use 4 quarterbacks this season. Tri-County, they got a couple of very tough games to wrap things up. Newman at home on homecoming, playing good football, still banged up, and again having Griffin Pent being knocked out, another two-way starter. It just, holy cow. I mean, you talk about just constant hurdles for the Cards, but they've been able to keep their feet up to this point.
Yeah, and the silver lining to all those injuries is they're used to it. It's part of it's part of the coaching staff's game planning each week, knowing that those barriers and hurdles are there, and the team knows, I'll use it, next man up mentality, right?
There's no, not in high school.
How are we shuffling? How are we going to shuffle the deck to put the best plan out there? And I think this is one of those situations where Coach Micklig's influence and game planning certainly plays a role in the outcomes of these games.
Some other 8-player games. There's actually a game tomorrow. Athens at Rib Lake. Athens still looking for that first win. Hard to believe. I mean, they're not a terrible football team, but they're just having a hard time getting that first win. In Rib Lake, looking for their 5th win of the season. You have Thorpe and McDonald. That's a massive game in 8-player football because Thorpe has 2 losses. If they can get to the finish line with 2 losses, I think they're in. McDonald, one of the top-ranked teams with 1 loss, a massive game for playoff potentialities in 8-player. Gilman looking to continue their winning ways against Lake Holcomb, and Owen Withy trying to keep their bus rolling, their wrecking ball going as they take on Clayton. So as we go, we got a little more than a minute to go. What are the games that you're really keeping an eye on this week?
I think the biggest one is for me is Everest and SPASH. It hits closest to home in the conference, and this is old school Wisconsin.
The national news cycle never stops, but it can be hard to find news about your local community. Civic Media is dedicated to providing quality local and state news coverage across Wisconsin. With the Civic Media app, you can get notifications about local stories that matter to you and your community. Find the free Civic Media app in your phone's app store and choose notifications from the menu to tell us what kind of news you want to hear about.